The Gathering, an extract from the anthology Shades of the Unknown by John Wing. The moon was large, seemingly larger than usual. I felt that if I reached out, I could almost touch it, and it wasn't its usual incandescent white, but a deep copper red, like a massive unblinking blood-stained eye, eerily dominating the heavens. Actually, I didn't quite give it its proper name. Helen explained. What you see is a super blood wolf moon. They occur quite infrequently. In fact, the next one won't happen in the UK until May 2024. You seem quite the authority on it. Not really. She paused. It seemed she was trying to prepare me for something, and she was deciding on how best to relate it to me. The films have got it all wrong, you know. Perplexed, I said, "What do you mean?" "Hollywood. They always have werewolves appearing every full moon, but it's not true, you know." "Oh," was all I could muster. "No," she continued. "We only transform whenever there is a super blood wolf moon. Quite infrequently, really." It was the term "we" that had me confused, and admittedly somewhat worried. "I don't understand." Once again, she gave me that winsome smile and patted me on the shoulder. "Not to worry, you'll soon see." Before I could reply, several bright lights were switched on and flooded the lawn as though daylight had suddenly burst upon the scene. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor Sanderson announced, "it is time." I inquired of Helen, "What's happening?" She looked into my eyes. As I beheld hers, mesmerising blue gems of perfection, I thought I caught a slight change in them, as if they were turning a darker shade of blue. "You're going to witness something quite incredible, Mr. Hadley. But don't worry." She patted me on the arm. "Victor has agreed that you shall not be harmed, as long as you don't interfere." Victor Sanderson then made a speech. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are children of the night, recognising the power and strength of the supermoon. We shake off the trappings of our humanity and welcome the change that makes us what we really are." He paused here before instructing. "Remove your garments. Allow yourselves as you are meant to be." He then nodded at Helen, upon which she opened the French windows. The interior heat immediately dispersed, and the October's cold night soon made itself apparent. I shuddered, whether because of the intrusive cold or the sudden turn of events, I wasn't sure. Everyone, apart from myself, undressed. I looked on dumbfounded, trying to make sense of what was happening. These people were perfectly reasonable, intelligent adults, but were now doing something so illogical and absurd that I couldn't comprehend it. Having shed their clothing, they all stood there, arms widespread, in supplication to the spherical object in the sky. By this time, the moon had taken on a more grisly, rampant red. As I observed these strangers, I saw that each of them had scars in their bodies where they had been clawed or even been bitten into. Helen, whom I was nearest to, had on her left side, below her breast, down to her thigh, definite teeth marks of some large animal. In one voice, they unexpectedly uttered, "We are yours, unfettered, free of our humanity, giving ourselves to you without reserve, ready to receive the blood that you share by devouring that which is weak and worthy of sacrifice, human flesh." I didn't know what I had walked into. Was it a satanic ritual, I wondered? To say I was anxious was an understatement. Then Victor declared in a loud guttural voice, "Release the prisoners." Below the large stone steps that led onto the wide expanse of well-cut grass, figures wandered onto the lawn from somewhere underneath the house, most of whom stumbled or crawled into the glaring lights. Though scruffy, doubtless to their confinement, they were dressed in mostly casual clothes, although a handful were attired in a suit. Many of them looked lost and confused, mainly shielding their eyes from the sudden brightness after presumably being confined in a dark room for goodness knows how long. I stuttered. What is this? The naked onlookers didn't answer me, either because they didn't hear me or because they didn't care. Like statues, they were inert. From what I could see, they barely breathed. "Helen," I implored, "what's happening?" She remained tight-lipped. She seemed oblivious of my presence. The people who roamed haphazardly, still adjusting to their freedom, were no longer protecting their eyes. Slowly, they became cognizant of their situation. Some helped others about them, while a few became braver and more confident, wanting to find a means of escape as they looked about them, searching, hoping to find a way out. One of them, whom I could hear very clearly, declared as he pointed up at the steps that led to where we were, "Look!" Several heads turned to gaze in our direction. It was at that moment the inexplicable happened. What I had always thought of as before as just pure fantasy, a good yarn to send shivers up and down one's spine, to excite, to thrill from the safety of an armchair as we read a good horror book, or in the coziness of a darkened theatre as a horror film feeds into our primal fear of the unknown. This was all shattered, because what I thought was total fabrication became distressingly real and deadly. The 8 people I had dined and conversed with were metamorphosizing. Their bodies jerked and pulled and shook as if they were all simultaneously experiencing some kind of violent seizure. Then they fell to their knees, not all at the same time. 2 collapsed, then 3, until lastly Daniel was on all fours. Their bodies shook uncontrollably, but even worse, their bones were poking through their skin like tent poles straining through canvas. Not only that, but hair began to sprout abundantly on their prostrate forms, thick, black animal hide. Even Helen and Lucy were suffering the same indignity. It was like watching some horrible freak show, and I was an appalled spectator, caught up in all this macabre assault. But that wasn't the worst of it, because what happened next pierced my very soul, penetrating every fibre of my being with such overwhelming fear. In unison, they began howling and snarling up at the bloody red moon like scavenging hyenas in the wilderness. By now, they were unrecognisable as humans. Their transformation was complete. They snarled. Saliva slowly dripped from their gaping mouths that showed sharp, long, lethal teeth. And their eyes were a bright, menacing yellow, full of lust and hunger and desperation. I didn't dare move or breathe or even bat an eyelid. I was transfixed in terror. I was truly on the precipice of hell itself, and I feared for my life. Before exiting to go after their intended victims, they all let out another demonic wail, and then scarpered down the steps. What had been Helen stood in me momentarily. I truly thought she was going to jump on me, but she didn't. She turned away from me and ran after the others. What I witnessed was insatiable, deplorable slaughter of the worst kind. The released prisoners didn't stand a chance. These ungodly creatures lunged at their throat, chest or pelvis, knocking them to the ground and tore into their flesh, tearing and clawing, while some of them managed to run screaming and shouting. But their fleeing was brief, because they too suffered the same inevitable fate. I just watched in dumbfounded horror as these beasts gnawed their prey, ripping their bodies mercilessly apart, crunching bone and drenched in blood. I saw a lone figure that had successfully survived this carnage and was reaching the periphery of the floodlights as she ran frantically for her life. I could hear her petrified screams, even above the chewing and shredding of human flesh. It was one of her squeals that caught the attention of one of these wolves. It arched its neck and gave out an ear-splitting, high-pitched, hideous howl, and then bounded for the doomed woman. She turned her head to see this fierce animal darting for her. Her fear got the better of her, for she tripped, falling clumsily to the ground. No sooner had she fallen, the wolf dived on her prostrate form, plunging its lethal teeth into her soft white neck. Blood spurted up in the air, saturating both animal and human, as it gorged on a now still body. 8 ravenous wolves, 30 lifeless bodies. All I could do was stare in wild-eyed disbelief at this blasphemous scene before me. They pulled at the carcasses, ripping bits of flesh and swallowing whole, then plunging for more into stomachs or throats, eating heart, kidneys or intestines, a gruesome indulgence that was distressingly magnified by their slurping and biting and chewing. One of them released another long, stormy, steep, terrifying wail. It turned its attention towards me, looking straight at me with its threatening, intense yellow eyes. I returned its gaze, but more out of fear than bravery. It nonchalantly padded for me, across the blood-soaked lawn, up the concrete steps, and up to the French open windows, stopping before my static self. I was mesmerised by this thing. Yes, I was scared shitless, but incredibly, I was in awe of it as well. Its open maw was soaked in blood, with blood dripping off its tongue and those long, sharp, fatal teeth. Bits of flesh clung to its matted fur as it stood on all fours, its height reaching up to my waist. As I looked into the creature's eyes, there was recognition, an identity of Helen. I knew it was her. How? I don't know, but I did. She had me under her spell. I tried to say something, but no words escaped my lips. Why, I don't know, but the animal nodded its head, then held me with its eyes once more, as if it was trying to convey something, though what I'm not sure. I managed to utter feebly her name. Helen? No sooner had her name passed my lips than the wolf plunged its teeth into the side of my stomach. I screamed out in agony as blood spoilt my white shirt. I collapsed to my knees, my head level with the animal's eyes. As I studied her, all fear that I had slipped away, and believe it or not, I was calm, even relaxed. The wolf licked my face with its blood-stained tongue. That was when I passed out. When I became conscious, the police were everywhere. Shades of the Unknown. Available to download or purchase as a paperback from Amazon.